My name is Diane Kaufman. I'm 66 years old. I want to tell you something that took me an embarrassingly long time to understand. We spend our entire adult lives preparing to stop working. We run the numbers with our accountant over and over again. We worry about Medicare limits. We worry about managing a fixed income. We protect the savings. We manage the budget. We do the math until the math is absolutely perfect. Any financial planner would tell you that is the hard part. They would be wrong. The hardest part is what happens the day after the math is done. I thought walking away from my businesses would feel like relief. It did feel like relief for about 3 weeks. And then it felt like something I don't have a clean word for. Not grief, not regret. Something quieter than that. It felt like standing in a room after everyone has left and realizing the room was yours and now it isn't. You build something for decades. You become the person who solves the problems. You get used to the weight of the obligations. You carry that weight for so long you forget it's there. And then one morning you wake up. The mortgage is handled. The adult children are fine. The pension is coming in. You have everything you ever wanted, and you have absolutely nothing to do. You are entirely irrelevant to the morning. I am not going to pretend I handled this with grace. There is a version of this story where I look good. That's not the one I'm telling today. I am telling the honest one. Because nobody tells you what it actually costs you emotionally to let it go. They just tell you to enjoy the quiet. They don't tell you how loud the quiet can get. I was getting dressed for what I thought was a business dinner. I put on the blazer, a very good blazer. I looked in the mirror. I adjusted the collar. I checked my phone for the address. I realized I had nowhere to be. The dinner was 3 weeks ago. I had written it in the wrong week. I stood in the bedroom in the blazer for 10 minutes. I was overdressed for absolutely nothing. Then I sat down on the bed and laughed. Then I cried a little. Then I was fine. That was the day I understood what transition actually means. It's not a date on a calendar. It's a Tuesday when you're fully dressed with nowhere to go. You wake up and the house is perfectly silent. The coffee is made, the sun is up over the Florida room, and you realize the urgency is completely gone. There is absolutely no reason you have to be awake right now, and that feels completely unnerving. Not good weird, just weird. You pour your coffee, you sit in your kitchen, you look at the clock and it is 8 in the morning. For 30 years, 8 in the morning meant motion. It meant you were important to someone's day. People were expecting you to make decisions. The decisions mattered. Now it just means it is 8 in the morning. The quiet is deafening. You have to decide what the day is going to be. Every single day. You have to invent a reason to be busy. You try to read a book, but you feel like you are skipping class. You feel guilty for sitting still. You wait for the phone to ring, and it doesn't. You walk outside. You check the mail. It is entirely junk. You walk back inside. It is now 8:15. You have the entire rest of your life stretching out in front of you. I'm not going to give you a 5-step system. I don't believe in 5-step systems. I've tried them. I'm not a consultant anymore. I'm someone who's been through it. Those are different things, and I try not to confuse them. I'm just going to tell you what happened and what we figured out. Because the absence of pressure is heavy. You build so much of yourself around being very good at the work. When it finally stops, you don't know what the rest of you is for. I was sitting in my attorney's office in Boca Raton. It was a Tuesday in November. I was 49 years old. I was signing the final papers to sell my second business. My hand was cramping from the signatures. There were maybe 50 pages. The buyer was across the table. He looked nervous. He was sweating slightly. I felt absolutely nothing, just a mild headache. The wire transfer hit my account at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon. It was a very specific number. It was more money than my father had made in his entire life. My father was an accountant. He was precise and careful. He would have been proud of that number. I walked out of the office and into the Florida heat. I got into my car. I turned the air conditioning all the way up. I closed my eyes, and I just sat there. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel free. I felt completely unemployed. I went to a coffee shop. I bought a $4 iced tea. I left a $40 tip because I didn't know how else to mark the occasion. The barista didn't even notice. I drove home. Richard was reading the paper in his chair. He looked up and asked if it was done. I said yes. He nodded and went back to the sports section. That was the whole celebration. I had spent 15 years building that company. I had missed things. I was traveling when my daughter Sophie's school play happened. I was on a call when Richard needed me to just sit still. I made choices. I don't pretend they were free. And it ended in a quiet room with a wire transfer and an iced tea. That was the first time I realized that crossing the finish line doesn't change who you are. It just removes the track. I rebuilt again after that. I consulted. I invested. I helped other women build what I had already built. I stayed busy for another 15 years. But I never forgot that Tuesday in the parking lot. I knew the final retirement would feel exactly like that, and I was right. So I want to go through 5 things I've noticed, things about this transition I wish someone had told me. Plain and direct, no fanfare, no hype, just the reality of what happens when the work finally stops completely. The first thing I noticed was that my professional competence did not translate to my personal life whatsoever. I was an absolute disaster at home. I tried to manage my house the way I managed a staff. It was a catastrophic failure. I had an entire system for organizing the pantry. I bought clear plastic bins. I labeled them. I spent $300 on containers. Richard watched me do this. He was leaning against the kitchen counter. He had his arms crossed. He retired 3 years before I did. He was fine immediately, just fine. I watched him do it from across the room for 3 years with great confusion and occasional resentment. He figured out retirement in about 6 weeks. He never mentioned it. That's probably why we're still married. He watched me label the pasta and he said very quietly that we were not running a restaurant. I ignored him. 2 days later, my daughter Sophie came over. She has 2 children. Noah is 9. He reminds me of my father. He negotiates everything. Claire is 6. She is going to be either a lawyer or a problem, possibly both. Sophie was exhausted. She was dealing with a contractor who was overcharging her for a bathroom remodel. She was nearly in tears. I immediately shifted into executive mode. I told her to bring me the contract. I started redlining it. I told her exactly what to say to the man. I practically drafted the email. Sophie looked at me. She looked incredibly tired. She said she didn't want me to fix it. She just wanted to complain about it. I was deeply offended. I had 30 years of experience negotiating contracts. It meant absolutely nothing at her kitchen table. Here's what I actually think. I think we confuse being useful with being in charge. I didn't want to help Sophie. I wanted to feel important. I wanted to be the boss again. That's when I figured out that my family didn't need a consultant. They needed a mother. Those are different jobs. I had to resign from the first one to be any good at the second. It took a long time to untangle that. I still catch myself trying to fix things that aren't mine to fix. I have to physically bite my tongue. I have earned the right to not know the answer to that, but my ego still wants to answer it anyway. I had to learn how to just sit there and listen. It is shockingly difficult to just listen when you are used to issuing directives. The second thing is the shift from making money to spending money. The math changes in your head. The numbers look completely different when they aren't being replenished every month. I am comfortable. I live well. I am very private about the specifics. My accountant knows the numbers. You don't need to. What I will tell you is that money is not the thing I want to talk about, but the psychology of it is inescapable. I went to the grocery store a few months after I stopped working. I put a jar of imported olives in my cart. They were $14. I stared at them for 5 minutes. I put them back on the shelf. I walked 2 aisles over to the dairy section. I went back and got them again. I put them back a second time. I was negotiating with myself over $14 in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I used to approve $20,000 payrolls without blinking. Now I was paralyzed by a jar of olives. I called my son Jonathan. He lives in New York. He works in finance. Jonathan is better at money than I am. I take no credit for that. I told him about the olives. He laughed at me. He is occasionally too direct with me, and I love that about him. He told me I was suffering from fixed income phantom pain. He said the money was there, but my brain didn't believe it yet. I don't fully understand why, but the fear of running out is entirely disconnected from the reality of your bank account. It is an emotional reflex. You spend decades building a wall of security. You measure your safety by how high the wall is. When you retire, you have to start taking bricks out of the wall to live. Every brick feels like a terrible failure. It took me a year to buy the olives without thinking about it. That's when I figured out that having enough doesn't matter if your nervous system doesn't believe you. You have to train yourself to spend the money you traded your youth to get. You have to permit yourself to enjoy the things you already paid for. It is a very strange unlearning process. You are unlearning 30 years of discipline, and it feels completely unnatural. The third thing is that your marriage requires an entirely new operating agreement. Richard and I built our life around two people who were both very busy. We had a rhythm. We respected each other's ambition. We passed each other in the hallway. We had brief, efficient conversations about logistics. Now we have to build it around two people who are just here, all the time, in the same house. That's a different project entirely. There was a Tuesday morning when I was trying to read the paper in the sitting room. It is a room I spent years decorating. I never actually sat in it until I retired. Richard was doing a crossword puzzle. He was breathing very loudly. He has always breathed like that. But suddenly, in the complete silence of a retired morning, it was the loudest sound in the world. I actually left the house. I got in my car and went to a coffee shop, just to escape the sound of my husband breathing. We were at dinner a few nights later, just the two of us, which still feels slightly new after all these years. Richard looked at me and asked, very quietly, if I actually liked my days now. I wanted to say yes. I started to say yes, and then I didn't. I told him I felt untethered. I told him I felt like a guest in my own life. He said he knew. He said I was treating our house like a waiting room, and Richard would say he was being gentle. He was actually being brutally honest. We had to learn how to occupy the same space without managing each other. I had to stop asking him what his goals for the week were. He had to stop asking me if I had finished my to-do list. We had to let the days be slightly empty. That cost me something. It was worth it. We are better now. But we had to dismantle the corporate structure of our marriage to find the actual marriage underneath it. We had to figure out how to just be a couple of people eating breakfast together without an agenda. It sounds incredibly simple. It is not simple at all. The fourth thing is the physical toll of letting go. Your body knows exactly when the war is over, and it abruptly stops fighting. I never got sick when I was working. I simply didn't have time for it. If I felt a cold coming on, I just ignored it. I drank more coffee. I pushed through. I was convinced sheer willpower was keeping me healthy. I viewed illness as a scheduling conflict. About 8 months after I officially stopped working, everything hurt. My back hurt. My shoulders ached constantly. I was exhausted by 2 in the afternoon. I thought something was seriously wrong with me. I went to my doctor. We ran the blood work. We checked everything. Everything was completely fine. My doctor looked at me and said I was just finally feeling the last 20 years. The adrenaline was gone. I had been running on anxiety and momentum since I was 30. When I finally stopped, my body basically collapsed in relief. I had to learn how to actually sleep, not just pass out from pure exhaustion, real sleep. I started waking up at 6 instead of 5, then 7. Then I stopped setting an alarm entirely. That was terrifying. I felt entirely unproductive. I felt lazy. I felt like I was losing my edge. I'm not going to pretend it was an easy process. I hated feeling weak. I hated needing rest. I made a business decision at 44 that cost me 2 years and a significant amount of money. I lost a lot of sleep over that. Richard said 4 words when I told him about the loss. He said, "Okay, now what?" That's the only business advice I've ever needed. But my body didn't know how to say, "Okay, now what?" It just knew how to panic. It took almost a full year for my nervous system to believe we weren't in a constant state of emergency. That's when I figured out that surviving isn't the same as resting. You have to actively teach your body that the emergency is over. You have to convince your own biology that you are safe. The 5th thing is the absolute necessity of defining your own elegance, not fashion. The elegance of knowing who you are when nobody is looking. There weren't many women in certain rooms when I was building my companies. I remember which rooms. I remember what it cost to stay in them. I had to be sharper. I had to be less emotional. I had to be absolutely flawless. I built an armor of competence. When I retired, I didn't know how to take the armor off. I would get dressed up just to go to the pharmacy. I couldn't bear the thought of looking undone. I spent 20 years in middle seats. I've graduated. I don't fly commercial if I can avoid it anymore. But the armor was still there. My mother was elegant without effort. I have to work at it. She never understood why. She never ran a business. She never managed anyone. She ran a household on very little. She raised 2 children. She always looked like she had a full night's sleep. I had all the resources she didn't have. I rarely managed to look as composed. My grandmother came here with a suitcase and a specific opinion about how a woman should carry herself. I think about that often. My mother used to say that you carry your worth inside you, or you don't carry it at all. I didn't understand that until I stopped working. I had attached my worth to my output, to my titles, to the problems I could solve. When the problems went away, I felt completely hollow. There is a version of yourself you think you'll become when you finally have enough. And then you have enough, and you're still yourself. That was the most useful disappointment of my life. I had to face the fact that money just buys you the space to sit with your actual problems. The problems look different in a nicer setting. They're still the same problems. I stopped trying to look successful around 48. That's when I actually started to feel it. I had to learn how to be a person again, just a person, not a founder, not a boss, just Diane. That is the quietest, hardest work I have ever done. It is the only work that actually matters now. I'm not going to tell you it all worked out perfectly. It hasn't. Some months are tighter emotionally than others. Some days I still wake up and wonder what I am doing with my morning. I still look at the clock at 8 a.m. and feel a phantom pressure in my chest. But mostly it's okay. More okay than I expected, honestly. I know the difference between moving forward and standing still while looking forward. I'm trying to actually move. I am learning how to let the days unfold without forcing them, and I think that's worth saying. If something in here landed for you, leave a comment. I want to know how you are handling the transition. Specifically, what is the one thing about letting go of your work that you didn't see coming? The sudden quiet, the loss of identity, the absolute panic over buying olives. I read them. I find them useful, more useful than I expected to. We are all figuring this out in real time. I'll do a follow-up on this. Subscribe if you want to see it. All right. Take care of yourselves.